We have a vision to be an international university of choice, anchored in Africa, dynamically shaping the future. Our mission is to inspire our community to transform and serve humanity through innovation and the collaborative pursuit of knowledge. To fully embrace the digital universe which we are beginning to inhabit, this is what we do at the University of Johannesburg. UJ, where the whole is far greater than the sum of its parts.
It's my great pleasure to welcome Professor Thea de Wet. She is the Senior Director of the Center of Academic Technologies at the University of Johannesburg, and she and her team have been at the very forefront of helping UJ and the students and staff turn COVID from a crisis into a major opportunity and into a moment of really exciting online learning and teaching. So Thea, over to you.
Thanks for the invitation, Maria. I'm struggling a little bit to link to the other two colleagues, but maybe there is a link. So let me just start. So the pandemic really disrupted the way that we were teaching and learning, because if you can see here on my screen, over 1 billion children and youth are out of the classroom and probably still out of the classroom. For many universities, it was really a shock to the system. Although many were ready, the vast majority around the world were actually caught unprepared or under-resourced for the shift. And major interventions were required to get students online. So our immediate challenges here in South Africa was immediately, how do you prepare staff and students for a quick shift? I recently heard from a colleague at a South African university, they trained 700 of their staff in 3 days and got them on a new learning management system. That must be a record. We were saying to ourselves, how do we reach our students? What were the best way of communicating with them? Will we complete the academic year? And if we have any international colleagues here on this call, then you would know that some South African universities will finish and others will not. Some of us will only complete the academic year next year in 2021. UJ is in the lucky position that we can finish this year. We ask ourselves, what will our students use to communicate? How will they access data? What about connectivity? And lots of students had little experience with learning and teaching online. And we have an additional problem, and that is load shedding. Luckily for us, up to the end of June, we didn't have a lot of problems. Currently, we do. So I want to quickly take you through the University of Johannesburg's response to having to go online. And here's a very nice timeline that I got from a colleague. And you will see that we had to rapidly get ourselves together. We had about 5 weeks to get all of our colleagues up and running, all of our modules online. So I thought one of the things that UJ did right was to think through some principles in the beginning. And one of the key things is the very first one: no student will be left behind. And I think that's still driving us. We also wanted to not disrupt teaching and learning. So we were really thinking about how we can do that best. Another really important decision for us was to think through how we're going to use data. And in that sense, we have lots of opportunities for the future. And I think, if I think about the library, Maria, we haven't really thought how we could integrate data from the learning management system, ULink, our single sign-on portal, and students' use of the library. And that is definitely an opportunity for next year. something else that was really important for us and for other universities here was to plan, to prepare, and to report. And so UJ immediately set up a lot of committees. I think there was quite a bit of overlap in the beginning, but I think as we were going on, the value of those two meetings in 1 week in the beginning, and later on weekly meetings were invaluable. That really helped us to prepare. So we said to ourselves, how are we going to complete this academic year? So the very first response was on the 2nd of March when the center that I'm the director of published their contingency plan. Ironically, I think it's on the same day or the next day that our first case was announced in South Africa. And we had to prepare to start on the 20th of April. Now, luckily for us, many of our students and staff were already familiar with online teaching and learning. We also knew from past surveys, and we started to use our data, that 99% of our students have a smartphone. And that made mobile learning and the use of applications really, really important. So we had a little bit of time before our students left campus to say to them, hey guys, while you have access to free Wi-Fi, please just download all of these apps. And we had a list for students, and I think many students did that. Unfortunately, only 80% of our students had a laptop or a desktop, and about 15% of those were a tablet. And so students left the campus with literally a cell phone in hand, and some of them have a laptop. A really important issue for us was to firm up our support desk so that we would be available for students 7 days a week. And I honestly have to say the 5 staff members working on that help desk really worked beyond the call of duty, over weekends, at night, early in the morning, to support students. It was the one dedicated place where students could ask us any question, a finance question, and we would send them somewhere, a technical question, and we would help them. We created quite a number of web-based resources for remote learning for staff and for students. It was not just how do I do it, but what if I just need help? And so we call it just-in-time help. We also send tips and advice to students. And I think the orientation week that the library also participated in was really key to identify and analyze what were students struggling with, what were their difficulties, what were their challenges. Access to data was a really critical issue for us. And what the university at a great cost decided was to give every student a monthly allocation of 30 gigabytes, 10 during the day and 20 gigabytes during the night. I really want to point out to colleagues that this idea of zero rating is false. It's zero rated for the students, but someone needs to pay. And although some sites were zero rated, none of the big companies in South Africa really supported the idea of zero rating resource-rich environments like the learning management systems. We had free textbooks, about 80 of them already available for students for the so-called priority modules, but the library really made an enormous contribution to bring e-textbooks to students. UJ was in the lucky position to have a project for the last 5-6 years where we would give our poorest students devices. And so over 20,000 devices went to students over the last 5 years. And this year we made 6,000 mini laptops available. For the poorest students, it was first years, it was free, and the rest of the students can have these devices as a loan. And we handed out 5,800 of these devices that were couriered all across South Africa. And that's a story all by itself. How do you establish where a device should be delivered in the hand of a student when there's no postal address? Low connectivity actually remains an issue. Another interesting thing, and this is something that we share with the library, is some of our single sign-on portals for students. The library has its own, and we have one where all students have the opportunity to link in. They can get all kinds of information about themselves, schedules, how much they owe the university, and so on. And it's the one trusted source of information. So if it was not on ULink, often students didn't believe it. We expanded that quite dramatically over the last 5 months and used it as a place where we could get information from students, but also a place where students could check all kinds of things. For example, why did I not get data? Staff, we prepared staff in exactly the same way. We had a lot of experience in 2016 and 17 during Fees Must Fall disruptions with intensifying our blended teaching and learning. And I believe if it wasn't for that, the transition would not have been so smooth to go online. A key issue for us was low data use strategies. And there were people who immediately thought, oh, I'm just going to do my lectures all live online. Well, those people forgot where our students live and how expensive data is in South Africa. So quickly people realized that WhatsApp was a key thing to communicate to students. We encourage short video clips. Many people are using podcasts instead of videos, or load their videos, chunk them so that people can get them later on. And here is the evidence that it actually went very well. So data was very important, and at our center, we track students and staff's access to our learning management system and to the single sign-on portal. So if you can look at the undergraduates, so this is pre-lockdown, this was the recess, already lockdown, and this was the start of term 2. Can you actually see how we were already quite a lot of students on, how it dipped a bit, and how it increased? The same for postgrads, and really interesting, very dramatically for academics. At the end, in term 2, we could safely say that only about 300 plus of our students, quote unquote, disappeared. And they were really the students we couldn't get hold of, because we on a weekly basis see who logged in and who didn't log in. Individual departments, faculties, at CAT and at the Academic Development and Support Division, we contacted students and invited them to let us help them. And often the problem was very simple. They needed a device. And as my last few slides, I would like to quickly talk about what now. So one of the things I believe the last 6 months exposed was the incredible inequalities around this country in terms of internet access and the high cost of data for young people from poor communities and people that live in remote, underserviced areas. Of course, this is not just a South African problem. It's interesting to note that it was one of the biggest challenges in the United States. In rural areas, they're very underserviced in terms of internet. So in this context, I think a lot of reflection took place. And it was not just the disparities, but it was also the lack of infrastructure in South Africa and the distribution of internet access the cost of data and the lack of computers. And I think we're really seriously thinking about how we're going to address this in the future. Otherwise, we will never have a socially just, equal platform for our young people to learn. Well, interesting, suddenly students became very visible. For once in many years, teaching and learning was on the forefront and research a little bit on the back burner. I think we had an enormous unintended teaching and learning intervention at UJ and also in South Africa, probably around the world, both for students and academics, because there was a two-way interaction that was often absent before. Students never had so much attention at this university. They got lots of messages, they got personalized messages. We sent them things, we asked their opinion, and we were really starting to rethink the way that we support our students. There's a new awareness of the need that for a more holistic, integrated and flexible approach supporting students. And I hope that we will keep that in mind going forward. There's also a need to address the inequalities, and we need to reframe our communication to students. And we learned a lot of lessons at UJ. A positive message goes a long way to calm everybody down. We also need to appreciate the importance of social and collaborative learning. There's really a risk of thinking that the online space is a wonderful place where you get individual attention, but we forget that learning is a collaborative endeavor, and it's best done in that way. So what about the future? I think this is a great opportunity to rethink education, how we teach, what we prepare students for, what type of society do we want going forward? Because this pandemic is not just linked to our relationship to the environment, to the way that we deal with animals. It is really about the future of the planet. And I think we need to use this as a disruption bigger than just about online learning. I think technology will continue to play a key role, but good pedagogy will always be more important. I think higher education would be more data informed, but it's a double-edged sword. It can help and harm. We really need to think about what data are we using, what is private, what belongs to you, what belongs to the institution. And then my last thought is that I do not believe brick and mortar universities will disappear. I think it will stay important, because the one thing we hear from students and colleagues is how much they miss physical contact, the interacting face-to-face. While learning online, I believe it will not disappear. We're really social animals. We're just not going to disappear into a URL. Thank you very much, Maria.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you to all three of our speakers. And I'm going to kick off with the first of the questions that I've received, and that is to Paul. In an age of digital resources, what ideas do you have to enable a global network of African archives?
Well, that's a critical question. And we need to just look at it historically. The African archive or African archives generally were removed from Africa. Because of colonization, many of these archives exist in the First World. The British Museum, Smithsonian, and so on, and well-resourced universities in the North. So the challenge is how to make these archives accessible in a digital age. And while we can talk about repatriation, I don't think we're necessarily talking about bring the archives back to the physical archives, but at least through digitization on the African continent, we will have access to these archives, and so that they become, resources that we can use and not lost to the continent.
Yeah. Thank you, Paul. And I'm sure that we, I know that we in the library space have had many conversations about thinking around how we try to connect the archives in South Africa. But I think one of the things that I took away from your talk was how we actually need to be thinking about this from a global perspective and the global archives of Africa that are out there. Mm-hmm. Then to you, Sandra, we have a question around institutional repositories. So, as you know, all universities have institutional repositories. And the question is, what would it take to use a blockchain for an institutional repository? Perhaps the question could also be asked as, what would be the value of using Bloxburg as a block of institutional repositories?
Mm-hmm. So I was end of last year at a conference with Science Europe, and they were highly interested to integrate institutional repositories to this type of like Bloxburg blockchain, because of course then you have the digital layer, distributed layer, where you can see, okay, the first entry was last year, this or that date, and then maybe you have also repositories where you have kind of living material. So, and then you maybe change it again, and then of course you can certify it immediately via blockchain, Bloxburg technology. And if you make it easy, you just press a button, or even automatically everyone who is uploading something in your institutional repository is in the same time certified, then you can also make sure it comes maybe from your researchers, from your collaboration partners, and so on.
So Sandra, I just want to make sure that I understood you correctly, because I can't see hands. In other words, you're saying that any university anywhere in the world can join Bloxburg, and with adding on just one application onto your institutional repository, every time somebody's master's or PhD or anything else on the repository went up, it would be automatically certified and date stamped, so that you would always know that this was Joe Soap's PhD that in this format was put onto the institutional repository on that date at that time.
Exactly. You don't need to be a Bloxburg member if you want to do that. So it is an open blockchain. But of course, if you address more question about, then it's for a university easier to discuss it within the network, the Bloxburg members network. But in principle, everyone can use it. There's an open API, and use it for your own institutional repository. Exactly, yes.
So, and then that would take away any questions about whether this PhD was actually written and actually put up at a particular time.
For example, yeah.
Okay, so I have a question for Thea. Thea, how do you think pedagogy might need to be rethought going forward after what we've learned during this COVID period?
Right. Maria, I think we know what we're supposed to do. We've just not been doing it. And so I don't think a lot of things are going to change in terms of if you think suddenly technology is now going to take over. That is not going to happen. What we need to do is to think, how do students learn best? And stop being sage on the stage. And unfortunately, online has the potential to exacerbate that problem. And that is that you think your students are somewhere and you just transmit to them. I think many people started out like that. It's like, okay, this is very easy. I'm sitting in front of my computer. The students are in front of their computers and I can just talk to them. I think we have to really rethink how we learn, what we learn. I do think there will be some changes in how we put degrees together, but I think that's a different conversation. But in terms of pedagogies, I think what we're missing is an integrated approach to student well-being and success. We do it very choppy, but if you think about a caring professor, as the Americans call it, the caring lecturer, it's somebody that is not just thinking about the student's academic progress, but also about that student's well-being. And I think this situation made us so aware of where our students live, what their circumstances are. In the over 2,000 letters that my colleague Albin and I received, students describe their circumstances. Even if you take it with a pinch of salt, because some of them were really desperate to come back, the stories were all the same. Lack of space to study, lack of connectivity, having to work on like household duties, when they're first generation to university. And I think all in all, we need to rethink what kind of how we want to use a university to build a particular kind of society. So it's also about what we want that's different from preparing young people to work on an assembly line. That was now a long-winded answer, but I think that's a lot for us to rethink.
Exactly. And it's actually something we've talked about in piecemeal ways, but we've not really rethought. And we've not really rethought the project of education in the 21st century. But we have time for just one last question, and that is...
Can I add something? It's also an opportunity, while this is a library event, for all of the divisions at UJ to work together. If you just think, I'm listening now to the blockchain conversation, and I just think how there are divisions that's busy with a side blockchain project. Do you know what I'm saying? It's about working together and actually working on the same project all at the same time and not being in competition.
Yeah. So the last question is for you, Paul. How will photographers protect their copyright? I'm expecting that this question is in context of archives.
Well, unlike social media, which just, distributes imagery and images widely, through a university archive or website, you absolutely need the copyright of the photographer and an agreement, or their heirs or their family. So by digitizing your work, you don't lose copyright. You're just sharing it. And usually it's a very small image that you can use in a PowerPoint presentation or, sometimes even in a thesis, but it's not for publishing per se or commercial publishing. So the photographer is protected, always.
Thank you, Paul. So thank you very much to the three speakers. I think, if nothing else, this particular sub-theme speaks to the fact that as libraries, we are deeply entrenched in the projects of research and of learning. And I know that librarians are particularly interested in finding out more about their universities and their student experience within the university and the multiple different resources that we have. And we've really gone from everything from looking at historical pictures from the 1800s to blockchain of the 21st century. So thank you very much to all the participants.
The University of Johannesburg, the future reimagined.